Hey folks, so today's guest is Larry Levine and he's the business owner at P3 Cost Analysts. So Larry, if you can just tell us a little bit about what you do and a little bit more about the company.
Thank you, Paul. Larry Levine here, P3 Cost Analysts. I'm one of the business development managers, franchise owners of the business. We help businesses reduce their indirect vendor overcharges. That's a whole lot of think about what your direct vendors are. If you're a card manufacturer, you have metal and leather and oil and glass as your direct expenses. If you're a restaurant operator, you have tomatoes and steaks and labor as your direct expenses. But you also have a handful of other indirect expenses to support the business that don't necessarily make their way into the product or the service. Telecom, utilities, waste, uniforms, insurance, shipping perhaps, property tax. Those are all considered indirect expenses. Many businesses, we've discovered that 90% or more businesses are overcharged on their set of indirect expenses by some 30 to 40% average. And we're here to help you recognize that and reduce that for you, and ultimately improve your bottom line and your valuation.
Amazing. Well, that was very well put, Larry. You guys have been around a long time. What would be major changes within your industry, cost reduction in the last sort of 3 to 5 years? Has it changed dramatically in any way?
I think there's more opportunities as this particular business matures and expands. We bring in more categories, but I think the way we obtain the savings, the way we discover the savings, is a traditional, tried and true way, and that is by looking at and auditing invoices and contracts. Some of our categories are more automated than others. Some categories have a little bit of AI, a little bit of automation on top of it to actually look at the invoices, look at the contracts, and suggest better terms, conditions, and rates. But ultimately, a person is involved talking to a person on the other side on the uniforms and linens with the uniforms linen vendors, with the waste vendors, or with the property tax managers in your city. So there's little in the way of currently automation to get that done. But what we've seen is more automation to find those businesses that could benefit from cost reduction.
Well, that's kind of nice to hear in a sense, because yes, there's an old school method of, you just have to find the best people, the best contracts. I mean, from your experience, that gap and that indirect world of costs, would you feel that a lot of small businesses, that's where their profit margin lies, that a lot of them get stuck in that world where they don't spend as much effort on, the linens, all those things that is not very glamorous?
The last part of your sentence is definitely true. They don't spend a lot of time and effort there. They're spending time on their top line product service, creating the best experience for their customers, the best product for their customers, working to reduce the cogs of the associated with that product or service, and more often than not, take for granted, assume that the rates and the categories and the invoices are the best they can be, that there are no errors in the invoices that they're receiving from these vendors, and simply just pay them. My first ever client was a 10 location retail chain in Massachusetts, a single finance director, and I think it was an accounts payable person that just paid accounts. He's paying attention to the cost of his top line product. I can't share what the product was. It'll give away the name of the business. But the primary focus is paying attention to the top line products, the brands and models that they're reselling, and the cogs associated with it, and payment terms associated with the vendors, and took for granted his waste costs. We were able to come in and save him 76% on his waste costs. And in response to that, he said, I don't look at my invoices, I just pay them. That's so true of so many clients. And if you were to look at those invoices, what would you be looking for? Are you an expert in, let's pick on waste. Are you an expert in the waste industry? Are you an industry insider? Have you worked at one of the major players? Do you know what the best terms and conditions are? Do you have access to cost level, benchmark level databases to compare your rates to? Probably not. Maybe you are one of the 10%. I said 90% earlier of our clients are overpaying. Maybe you're one of the 10% that got the best rates. I'd be willing to bet 90% you're not. He was an outlier certainly, but that's the ratios are true across the industry.
And of course, and to get into a slight stereotype, but I mean, I do think there's some truth to it, where the mindset to sit down and go through accounts, that type of mindset is not entrepreneurial. The guy that sets up the company and goes for these either in sales or people, building teams, spotting gaps, the creative element of it. The last thing most entrepreneurs want to do, whether when they start out to a massive company, is sit down every month for days and go through invoices, accounts. You hand it off as fast as possible to your
The,
accounts
the
department.
leaders of that company and most companies are passionate about what they do top line. They're passionate about their widgets, about their service, whatever it may be, and just take for granted. There was another another restaurant group that I did not win. That it was a restaurant group, so it was very passionate. It delivers great food. I've been to several of his restaurants, and he's convinced that because he's done this for 30 years or more, that he's got the best rates possible for his waste and his utilities and you don't. Now, I'm willing to bet you don't. But it's a two-sided coin. I don't know that he is or is not looking, or someone on his team is or is not looking, but they probably don't have industry insider knowledge. They may have better rates than a guy across the street. And if you were to approach your waste vendor, if you think, hey, I'm gonna negotiate with my waste vendor and get better rates than they're offering me. The waste vendor may offer you 5 or 10% off from 1,000, just to pick around number $1,000 a month down to $900 a month to pick up your waste, and you think you won. You probably didn't, because there's probably another 30, 40, 50% more for them to cut down, and that reduction is built into their pricing.
Of course, of course.
This guy's happy with his margins, but he
Mm-hmm.
could be happier. But he's letting ego get in the way.
You're working on them, yeah. And we all know it's true, because even just to come way down to just the consumer level, I mean, I have a
Sure.
phone, I have a TV bill, I have a mortgage, I could probably sit down and hit research and get better deals across, a million things in my life. And you don't, because it's annoying work, credit card bills, holidays, could you just sit down and find the best holiday for really cheap? Well, of course, because there's deals
Yeah,
everywhere, but
there's a cost
it's
associated
very
with doing that.
difficult.
Because there is
It's,
a company, I don't remember the name of the company. I hear them on the radio, not so much in the last few months, but there's a company that does similar to what we do, but at a consumer level. They'll work on your behalf to work with your utility company, your cable bill, and reduce the rates. And they have access to better rate. They have knowledge of better rates. And we didn't talk about our model, but they'll share in the savings. I think they say for every dime we save, you'll pay us a nickel or something to that effect. What that means is, like, if they save you $50, you'll pay them $25. If you save them $100, you'll save them 50. You'll pay them $50, and that's our model as well. If we save you $10,000 across a year, 1 and 2 or 3, whatever many categories, utilities, waste, uniforms, linens, you'll pay us $5,000 a year on a month, across the months, as a share in the savings for our effort. But if you already had the best rates possible, as you're one of the 10%, or that one of your categories is already at the best rates possible, you don't pay us anything. You walk away with peace of mind that you're not overpaying anything, and that's the best outcome possible. That you, in fact, you got a free audit and were verified to be paying the best rate possible and not overpaying for years. But
so that's an incredible business model. And I don't know if you have had it from the start, or had it for a long time. So not to repeat it, but you guys go in for free to companies. You guys are doing an audit, and we will try and reduce your bills. And when we reduce them, we'll just take a cut from the savings. But either way, your bills are going to go down.
your bills are not going to go up. So if your
Yes,
rate is already the best rate possible, if
of
you already have the
course.
best utility rates possible, and we could have a longer, deeper conversation about regulated versus deregulated energy. But if you're in a deregulated energy market and you already have a great contract, we can't reduce it. We'll tell you, you already have the best rates. We're not going to recommend a change in your rates or change the supplier. And you walked away with a free audit and your peace of mind. But your waste might have been overcharged by $50, $5,000. You may dollars. I hear an accent, so I don't know if bucks translates to where you're from.
Bucks, yeah. We got it.
You may be overserviced. So
Yeah.
you and I spoke before the call started, before this video started. My largest client is a hotel on the West Coast, and they're auditing 2 services for them. Both of those services are regulated. And again, we could talk about what regulated means and deregulated means. But in the waste space, we could not change the rates. The rates were the rates were the rates. And could not, because your local municipality contracted with a waste vendor to provide waste services for their I don't know if it's just commercial or residential as well, but this is commercial business. But we discovered that they were overserviced. They had a compactor that was being picked up every week at 20% capacity, sometimes 30% capacity. So we changed the service level, same pickups, but instead of every week, it was once a month or there. So some months they had no expense because when it's California, sometimes it's cool, sometimes it's not busy. There's no waste. And when it is busy, you'll get a pickup every 2 or 3 weeks and cut the waste expense in half. So right sizing.
I've slight experience in that where, yes, because I think to the average person that might seem almost simple or, but I worked in an estate before that was huge and, the bins of the estate was enormous. So to have the collection services and the bins and everything to be brought together each week or each month was a massive job. And that was one of the areas that actually we were able to save, where getting that pickup and collection correct took a lot of trial and error. And so
Well,
that's just one
well,
tiny aspect of it.
two things going on there at this particular client. I think in general, number one, they're paying attention to primary hotel operations, rooms, service, delivery. I mean, they have I'll call them back office people, engineers responsible for filling the bins and fixing broken things. But the other part of it is that the invoices that are coming from the waste vendor are a little bit cryptic. Unless you know what you're reading, these 3 letters that don't make a word don't mean anything to you. Our waste auditors, and you spoke with our copier auditor, know how to read the invoices, know what this is all about, and made the recommendation that, okay, the past 6, 8, 9 months, most of your pickups were 20, 30%. Is writing the invoice. Their engineer wasn't trained on how to read waste invoices. His engineer is trained on how to do other engineering work. So that's where we come in with the knowledge on how to read the invoices, how to negotiate, how to recognize, how to right size.
And where would they be big on hotels? I work with a lot of hotels myself. So what would be an area that a lot of hotels might miss in terms of saving money?
So I'll answer it the way I know best how to answer it. The categories that my business supports that most hotels spend money in include telecom, utilities, waste, uniforms, linens. It depends on whether they own the uniforms or they're leasing the uniforms. Insurance, whether that be property and casualty or health insurance, and property tax. Those are the primary 4 or 5 categories there. And then depending on where the business is, we may or may not be able to do anything with the utilities if it's a regulated environment, or with the waste if it's a regulated environment. But at that same hotel, they were paying some $800,000 a year they're part of a group, for electricity, which is a whole lot of money for electricity anywhere. And they tried for months to try to see if are there any other options? Are there any other options? No, you're in a regulated environment. We can't change the rates of the rates. And I was chasing this client for well over a year, and we decided this is the best first hotel to look at. We went on a contract. We looked at the waste, of course, and we looked at the utilities, and discovered that they were on a green energy model. Green energy is expensive. With our knowledge, we were able to work with the local utility provider, no new utility provider, change the classification to brown energy. And we haven't completed a full year yet, almost a full year, but between $90,000 and $100,000 a year of reduction of electricity charges. We don't expect anybody would know. Conceptually, they know how to do that. Conceptually, people understand what green energy versus brown energy is, but how to recognize that your service is green or brown, no one was going to know. It doesn't say that at all on your invoice. Mm-hmm. And what would you look for? What it's called a tariff. What tariff would you look for and ask for from the utility company? Because they're not advertising that to the consumers. Our utility auditors understand that. So between the two, we're able to save them over $100,000 a year. And just as a quick little side note, they're part of a group. We're auditing other hotels. The next hotel does not have $100,000 waste of electricity savings, does not have any savings on waste. But their telecom and their TV service, we're in the process of today being March 18th, March 20th, 2026, we're likely to save them $30,000 a year, because I looked at the audit the other day, on telecom and TV services. Again, they understand conceptually what's going on, but don't have access to rates, don't know where to look. We don't do an audit of all telephone lines to see if all telephone lines are active and in service, or just ring no answer. And are there other options for other service providers that might provide the same service for the live lines cheaper. And especially in
It
today's world where plain old telephony service POTS, copper lines are being phased
Mhm.
out and the rates are increasing, and AT&T is not telling you the rates are increasing until the rates
Of
increase.
course, yeah. Um, no, I can see how difficult it would be for an individual to figure all this stuff out. So maybe a tricky question, Larry, but would there be a kind of an order you could put those in the biggest savings? So I mean, for a hotel, electricity is utilities always at the top, or
So I understand the question. It's unique for every hotel because
yeah,
of the three of that group, only one of them had any ability. We're successful at only one of the hotels to reduce the electricity, only one of the hotels to reduce waste, and only one of the hotels to reduce telecom. So you never know. So it's best to like take a look at a portfolio of properties, whether it be multifamily or restaurants or hotels, and look at them as a whole because you don't necessarily know in advance where the savings are going to be. You could look at an invoice and say this looks pretty high, and then when you peel back the onion, they may be in a regulated environment, or it's not a competitive environment where there's no incentive on their part to reduce the cost for you. The there's this I've heard stories about, you know, the client wanted to slow roll it with us and to see how it goes before we audit other categories. And the business development manager was pretty sharp and said, "No, explain what I said to you just now," and discovered on the ninth or 10th property huge savings. But if they slow rolled it and decided early on, we'll add the second and third and fourth as we find savings, they would never have gotten to that. And that's more of an approach to how more of a technique in how we approach the client. But to answer your question, you don't know where it's going to come from.
um,
We can all look at a business and say, well, yeah, they have waste and they have utilities. They have telephones, but they're not a telephone. They don't have a telephone bank.
mm,
They don't have a telephone. They don't have dozens of people answering the phones, so they don't have that many. They
yeah.
probably don't have that much charges. But as at a hotel, you got 2, 3, 400 rooms. They got telephone lines, and there may be an opportunity there. But as I said, the first two hotels in that particular group had no savings with telecom.
So perhaps a tricky question again, but I'm
Yeah,
just
sure.
curious. So you win the lottery tomorrow, Larry, and you're building a hotel. So I'll give you a field. You're building it from scratch. Is there any tricks in terms of you can actually set your world up so well that I'm going to have such an efficient running hotel? Is there any tricks of the trade that you would see the hotel differently to legacy hotels?
What's going through my mind right now is I wrote 2 articles, and they talk about procurement teams not having the skills, nor would we expect them to have the skills, but to do what I had just said. If you have the time, if you want to negotiate on your own and try to pull the rates down from what these vendors offer you to something lower. But you're likely to be challenged because you don't have the industry insider experience, you don't have the cost level database, and if you're probably help anybody, but we're not going after the corner niche shop where her waste expenses are $100 a month because the return is not that much for either one of us. We're going after the 20 million to $500 million business where there are expenses. So if you're building that, I don't know how much revenue a hotel brings in, but um, ensure
10
your
to 20,
procurement
5 to 20 would be, if you want to, if that helps.
Yeah, but incentivize your procurement team to think outside the box and
Okay.
put ego aside and think about bottom line as if they're a shareholder and recognize perhaps that they're not industry insiders and seek a partner that might be able to help. Not all partners can help as well as others. Not all expenses are going to be, as I mentioned a few times, reduced because of one reason or another. Maybe they got they got the best expenses, or they're in a regulated environment where expenses, costs are the cost of the costs. But to think outside the box and where everybody works on all lines possible to reduce expenses, while the product team and the service team works to on the top line expenses, and ultimately improve your bottom line. So I hear people you're talking about building a hotel. It's the first time anyone asked me this, but I hear
Hmm.
people concerned all the time about rising COGS, whether that could be because of tariffs or because of oil in Iran or because of price of
E&M1 things.
labor, and their margins are decreasing, and they're focusing on that. And you could read the newspapers on this hotel chain, restaurant chain, or this other business closing down because the margins have disappeared. I'm not sure we could have saved any of these businesses, but they're not. They're many of them are just not. We're outreaching to them. Have been outreaching to them. Not myself personally for all of them, but they're not responding. They're paying a lot of attention to top line, but there is a way to offset some of these expenses if they're not completely failing by reducing some midline expenses, 30 to 40%.
But you see, it's a small tip in there where I can't imagine many hotels and even hotel chains have financial incentives for their procurement teams or vendors. And
Yeah.
that would be such a small thing. The wedding coordinator might have one, or the head of sales, where, if you hit a target for 50 weddings, or if your head
Yeah.
of culinary hits a target, they get a bonus. But meanwhile, the guy in vendors or procurement, which is the unglamorous world, it's just a salary. They might be doing their job very well, but they could be saving the company an enormous amount of money,
Tons more.
and they don't really get maybe the rewards that they could. So very true, such a small tip, but it's basically what your model. If you have someone internal, if you save us 100,000, 10 for you, because like
Yeah, it's
what a
free money.
huge
Yeah, and after the 50-50 split, we're going to get 50 of the 100, but there's still 50 left. There's still 40 left after that, and that 40 can go toward whatever else, whatever you need to do.
you fairly get your procurement guy pushing a much more if there's an incentive there. So yeah, it's a strong tip.
But we regularly find school districts and governments where we're able to save them millions of dollars. When you multiply how many copies that are out there over a 5-year period and just saving the bottom line 20%, I'm sure mentioned some of this, that's millions of dollars, not tens of millions, but sometimes 1.2, $3.4 million. And what can you do with that much money? So that's taxpayer money that can be reduced. That's money back to the budget for, I don't know, teachers, programs, whatever it may be. It's real tangible dollars. Some clients were only able to save them a few $1,000s a year, and it is what it is. But when you're talking to a large school district with 2, 3, 400 schools, we know there's a lot of money there. But I mentioned before, the businesses that we approach primarily are in the $20 million to $500 million range. Below 20 million, you'll occasionally find businesses that meet our minimum requirements. Above 500 million, absolutely we'll find them, but there's a lot more bureaucracy involved, a lot more board of directors, and they may have teams that are successful at doing what they're going to be at implementing this to some degree or another. So, but certainly, I kind of got lost just now, but we regularly talk to $1 billion businesses, $1 billion of revenue, and we're pretty confident we can save them $1 million across these categories. The challenge is that $1 million is 1/10 of 1% of a billion. I don't ever thought of it that way, but it's big money for us potentially,
Mhm.
but it's not interesting enough for them. But if they think of it another way, or a school district with a multi-billion dollar, the largest school districts approach that. That's potential game changer when it comes to, feeding people that can't afford lunch, or
Mhm.
teacher salaries, or after school programs. So there's a lot of things that can be done. And back to your
And
point, rewarding somebody for finding that.
indeed. And how do you, in your own business model of the company P3 Cost Analysis, how do you guys get in the door of these type of businesses? So, I mean, is there marketing on a very basic level, or is it very much, sales reps, because you're dealing with such, 20 million to larger companies? Is it networking? How do you get in the door and start these conversations?
It's all of the above. So again, we're a franchise model. The franchisor does some marketing, and of course, everybody wants more marketing for free. But in this particular business, most of the outreach, I'll call it, is up to the responsibility of the franchisee. So what I've done, of course, is network with everybody I know. Who do you know that that has expenses that can afford cost reduction, that can benefit from cost reduction? Work with existing client wins. Can I mention you? Can you refer me to another hotel or another multifamily community group? And those are some of my clients. So beyond that, it's very, very easy to identify businesses that can benefit from cost reduction. Drive up and down the street, whether you recognize whether it's a national brand or not. If you do a little analysis in your head, that restaurant group, oh, it's only a local restaurant group, but they have 8 locations across the area. They're probably large enough. They're probably doing $10-20 million. That's worth looking at. Walking, excuse me, walking down, going to your local mall. Local mall is full of brands. The brands are either their own manufacturing or they're reselling other brands. And almost all the product is coming into the store via FedEx and UPS. It's just the way it is. If you ever walk through a mall, you see it coming in through FedEx and UPS, which is one of our categories. Back end, if they're manufacturing their own products, there's opportunity to reach out to chief financial officers and controllers and chief operating officers about our value proposition. But I'll get back to that in a moment. And or the opportunity is the methodology is to just do an online search for the top 100 largest dermatology chains in the country,
Mhm.
top 100
But are you doing
hotel
this,
groups.
Larry? Are you now and again sitting down and
So that hotel group was cold outreach.
okay, well,
Wasn't in particular that particular one was not based on a listing of top 100 hotels. I also, and I was going to add this, I also joined mailing lists, strong mailing lists, hotel mailing lists, multifamily mailing lists. I learned a little bit about it. I want to learn their language. Most of these mailing lists, most of this news is about some new burger or some new property they acquired. I don't care so much about that. I care about the entity that was involved. And I keep track, I take notes, I reach out to the entity, to the CFO, and I say, try to keep it warm. I saw you just purchased this property. Congratulations. Sometimes that sounds a little sketchy, a little unwelcome. But if I come in politely and explain who I am, and in this particular hotel group, I was reaching out for 3 years, and I reached them, but early on. But it was just like not now, not now, not now. Eventually, it became ready because they had this expensive electricity. They had a relationship with us. Let's try it out. But I reach out to them from the mailing list and from now it's Gemini and Chat GPT, but back then, which is only a year ago, it was just a Google search for the top 100, whatever it may be that drives your passion. Some of my peers are interested in manufacturers, so they know how to reach. I mean, I know how to support a manufacturer, but I have no passion for manufacturers, so I search for healthcare, family, hotels, and a few others that may not interest me.
but to dig in, that's fascinating, Larry. Like you actually just reached out to a hotel. They said no for 3 years and you kept in contact with them, said hello, emailed now and again until they were in their thought. And then the day they were like, actually, we might look at our.
So sometimes it feels that way, like I'm being a pest in the ass to them. And in this particular situation, they expressed a mild interest, and they said not now, not now, not now, and each of those not nows was separated by 3 months. So after so many times, it became 3 years. So I know enough to not pester them for so long because I get put on the blacklist and they don't see my email. It only costs me 2 minutes a month to do this, but I'd rather reach out to somebody else that's more responsive. So
But I
one
just
of the
think that
things,
balance and persistence is very important for this podcast. Outreach and marketing and building businesses. It's just a great example of you did land the contract. And I think sometimes when I'm speaking to younger clients, I'm trying to explain, man, there's a lot of hustle in this. If you really want a big contract, it's not going to fall out of the sky. And no matter
yeah,
how big the company is, someone's hustling.
I'm
So it's just a
chasing,
great example of what it takes.
I'm chasing a multi-billion-dollar senior senior care company. Had conversations with them a while ago. It takes a long time to convert. I may never convert them, but it's a large enough entity and they've not said no. They've not said stop talking to them. So I continue every 2 months to just reach out. Is it ready? Have you seen this latest news article? And something else I'm recently discovering due to some other things outside of P3 Cost Analysts. We opened this conversation by my saying we reduce indirect vendor overcharges, which is a mouthful. And if you're a multifamily operator, if you're an apartment complex operator, you might understand that language pretty quickly, but that's not the language you use on a daily basis. The language you use on a daily basis is stabilization, is value add, is net operating income. So I'm lately discovering, at least in that space, to change my language to language that will pique their ears, pique their interest, perk their interest, and I could have a conversation. So their stabilization in the multifamily world means contracts are reliable. There's high occupancy, and I'm sure there's metrics associated with it, and there's cash flow. They're paying the bills, and there's net income, but they call it cash flow. So a value add to them would be to reduce some expenses. They think in terms of waste and utilities as value adds. They think in terms of rent increases as a value add, occupancy increases. I can't help them. That's top line stuff for them. That's their problem too. That's their opportunity. But I can come in and potentially help them with other expenses and provide value add to them and hence increase cash flow. So the bigger point being, know your customers, know their
Mhm.
language. And I'm still trying to
I
figure
love
that
it,
out.
Larry. And that's such a fantastic point, and I'm glad you're saying it. Do that sometimes doesn't land with owners. We call it branding, we call it marketing, we call it copywriting. And these words just in the same vein, they don't land with business owners
Yeah,
as
good
much as
point.
I think and I want them to do. My old mentor, who was a brand strategist at a very high level, he basically said we are glorified copywriters. We need to be able to explain the problem back to the client better than they can. You're halfway there. That is half the solution to the problem if you're able to speak their language. He used to use the term codify their language. You need to codify your own company's language in order to explain every aspect of it. And then that gets into marketing. But it does start with understanding the language of who you're speaking to.
So
It's
I
so
really
important.
back to Corey again. He's going to smack me over the head once he hears this video. I like Corey a lot, and Corey does really well with clients, but Corey knows copiers, and this is where he lives. He's got his language, and our utility auditor knows utilities. And if I were to be cut out of the middle, I would predict less closure, less communication, because they have their language, and the client has their language, value add and cash flow. I lost track of one occupancy, and I need to understand all of that to some degree and kind of bridge the gap. Yeah, it doesn't land if I talk about indirect vendor overcharges and terms and conditions. I got to talk about. I got to find the better.
Indeed.
I got to find language in my other categories, whether the hotel operators, and I think it's probably similar, but hotel operators and other retail and healthcare. I've been
That's
pursuing
it.
a health.
And in simple terms, as you said, to bring it again in my world of marketing, when you're speaking to someone, we might get there because we're speaking, but it's an ad, it's an email, it's an article, it's a post. And so once you write it, that's all you have. That's all they're going to see. Those few words that have to hit home perfectly. Either you can hire someone very good and they might get the words very well, or you can test to a crazy level and just let the, meta or algorithm figure it out. But you need a bit of money to play that game. But either way, you need to land on the correct language to get sales
And
over the
it's
line
not.
in person or in marketing.
And if you're reaching out to 10 ideal client profiles at a time, hotels, apartments, restaurants, car dealerships, that's four. You go come up with another 10. It's not the same language for all of them because they don't care. That you got to figure out what they care about and what their language is to get their attention. In some cases, it's EBITDA. In some cases, it's cost per door, or net income per door. It's all the same, but it's all different.
When you mention the hotel and so a bit of cold outreach, when you get in the door, I'm very curious, how do you begin a kind of onboarding process or a sales process? The next step is selling them on an audit. Can we come in and do an audit of your business? And then that begins the process. Just talk me through there. I'm very curious because again, at that high level of companies.
Certainly, I'm here 4 years now, and it has evolved, and it's not the same even within even within a vertical. Depends on the person. I explain what we do pretty quickly early on in an email. I prefer to email outreach first and then follow up with a voice with a call. Have you had a chance to read the email? And if not, whatever, I'll re-explain. I try to find out if they recognize they have a problem or opportunity. Try to make them think about. I ask them, I don't say, do you have indirect vendor overcharges? I say, how do you handle your indirect vendor overcharges? And, it doesn't land very often at all. But when it does, what do you mean indirect vendor? We're paying our bills. Well, so how did you negotiate your bills? And this goes into the whole conversation I started before. They send us an invoice, we pay the bills. So how did you negotiate the rates? No, the rates are the rates. Why? How do you know? So, and then we go into the, if they're not opposing, if they're objecting to, I say, oh, are your auditors industry insiders? If they haven't hung up yet, are your auditors industry insiders? Do they have this knowledge? Do you have access to cost level databases? Are you interested in increasing your margin? And so we have that kind of a conversation. And if it goes from there, then we ask them to sign a contract. We're not going to do you mentioned to get an audit for free, probably 10 minutes ago. Yes, but it's going to be under contract because there's an
Getcha.
expectation that if we do find savings, we're going to implement the savings for you with your permission. We're not going to do anything without your permission. We're not going to go
Hmm.
with your permission. We're going to contact your vendors for you, but we're not going to change any terms and conditions until we present it to you and you accept it. So the closing rate is not as high as I would like it to be, and I think some of the challenges it's gonna land with you right now is that there's so many of the people we reach out to are being bombarded by cold calls, being bombarded by very scripted AI that sounds like AI. That's too I can't remember the word. I'll say sketchy. I'll give an example in a moment because
Hmm.
I spoke to somebody yesterday about this and are just tired from all the outreach and COVID and AI. So I had another business a bunch of years ago, a franchise business, and the franchise support team suggested we reach out to referral sources, not the clients, and do research with them about perhaps what school they went to, and by looking at LinkedIn and purchasing a mug from that school and sending it to them to build rapport. That is so creepy. So my leads don't want to hear from me, and I get called all the time. I'm on the other side of the call all the time. Hi, how are you? How's the day? How's the weather? I'm like, I know you want to sell me something. I'm open to hearing about it, but don't waste my time. So
Hmm.
I don't get into this whole conversation with them about the game or about the weather. It works for very few people. I know people that it works for. I'm a Northeasterner from New York and Massachusetts. You know, when somebody says, hi, how are you? Good. I move on. There are very few people that wait. There's a whole other conversation, but there are some people in this country that wait for the answer. And like, I'm not that. And I assume most of the people I'm reaching out to don't want to have
Yeah.
that conversation. If it gets to that later on because they're so happy, cool. That's fine. But I don't want to waste their time.
I asked this of Corey too, because I find it just touches on something interesting, I suppose, into what we're kind of skirting around, the psychology of sales and the psychology of selling. When you are speaking with someone and they are a big client and you're saying it won't cost you anything, we'll do an audit, you're probably going to save money. Chances of you saving money is very high. We've been doing this a long time. So really there is zero risk to you. And they don't move forward. Can you put your finger on mentally what is happening there? Why are we reluctant as humans sometimes to just, I'm hearing your words. I believe you. If someone had a gun to my head now, I would say, yeah, I believe him. And yet something stops us. 4 years of experience. What do you think?
There's a bunch of answers there. Early on, when we were trained, one of the things we were told that some people will say is too good to be true. And I had a client, a lead say to me, it is too good to be true. Another smaller hotel operator. She wanted it to be true, but it's too good to be true. And like she stopped. I think what got in her way was ego. And I mentioned that before with respect to some people. I think they don't think it's, in some cases, will find all that much money or there'll be too much time involved on their side. And it's really not. And I alluded to this before. So when you're in the public sector, and we'll never ever hear this, nobody will ever say this to us, most of these comments. But in the public sector, we get the sense that it's not my money, I don't care. And that the most because there's no way I'm going to convert them. Every once in a while, you get a public sector, a city government, states, it's so difficult. City government or school district where someone does care. He or she wants to do the right thing. Great person to work with. So when you're talking to corporate America, we've learned to more often than not, don't talk to, that's a triple negative. Don't talk to the procurement director because there's a pride and ego issue there. Even though recommended, incentivize the
Hmm.
procurement director, don't talk to the property manager of the hotel or the apartment complex. Find the controller, find the CFO, find the owner, the
Hmm.
original owner, where they care about valuation. And we'll put aside little Johnny's ego, who's responsible for that. and help them do a better job. And I'll explain to them he's probably doing a great job, but he doesn't have the data available to him, nor does anybody else in his position have the data available. Let us focus on some of these midline expenses where the property manager, to allow the property manager or the, what was the other example, or the GM of the hotel, focus on customer experience.
It's amazing how it all ties together. And that's a great kind of area to leave it on, where outreach, marketing, but you have to find the right person. The message has to be at the right time and in the right words. And it sounds very simple, but it isn't. And it takes a lot of experience. But there it is. If you find the right person and say the right thing at the right time, it can work. And it just takes a bit of patience. But
Time is
that
an
is
air.
yeah, and that is the skill in it all in a nutshell. But I think at that higher level, that's what I also find when I'm doing outreach for bigger clients. Most of the work is almost finding the right person. As these companies get larger and larger, the layers of who to speak to within the organization is tricky, and you can't know who you're meant to talk to sometimes. You have to kind of keep trying, I suppose, and you're
Yeah.
landing at random desks. Surely I'm meant to speak to this person. And it kind of just, we never get through. And then the more you get to know the industry, it's like, actually, that person, you need to speak to this person. So you
And
need to find
it
the
may
right
take a year to
person.
find that out. It may
Yes,
take a year.
absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
recently, probably 6 months ago, spoke to the CFO of a fairly large restaurant group, multi-brand restaurant group. He accidentally took my call because they were in the middle of a merger. So he listened to me for a few minutes. I believe there was interest in there, but the timing was absolutely wrong because his entire team was wrapped into the purchase and then into the integration of this new brand. So there's a lot of effort and money on top line as the business, and they couldn't afford. So it's maybe now, maybe. So it could be another 3 years with this group as it was for that first group. So yeah, it's absolutely maybe the perfect message to the perfect person. His mind is not there now. He got some other things going on. And then after 3 years of reaching out to him, you just discover he just left. Examples where name brands that you'd recognize, most of them, I'm about to be introduced to the CFO of this very large quick serve restaurant group, and boom, he's gone, which to me is a signal that they're in trouble.
It's just success for yourselves. I mean, and if everything goes right for P3 Cost Analysis in the next 6 months or year, where do you guys see yourselves?
I can't, I'm a franchisee, so I can't speak to the franchisor's
For,
success.
for your franchise, sorry,
Yeah, but
then.
I will
For your,
say more. I'll lend a little bit to them. More franchisees, more deals being closed, more categories being added. We occasionally add a category. On average, probably 1.2 categories a year since I've been here. So I see categories being added, and I think at a higher level than that, a greater awareness of the opportunity, and that's a marketing effort. Without getting into internal politics, that's a marketing effort that's shared between franchisees and franchisors. So when you approach, my dream is that when I approach a CFO of a group of whatever kind of business, that, and most CFOs honestly are aware of the opportunity, but maybe not aware of how to implement it, and are certainly focusing on EBITDA and top line, but they may be more aware of the industry and maybe of our brand, and are more open to the conversation than we've been historically having. AI is getting in the way. I'd hope it is getting in the way, because AI is over. This will land a little bit with you. Over promise, under delivered in many ways. I'm talking about agentic AI. I'm not talking about Chat GPT. I mean, they can get me lists of stuff, whatever, but they're not landing right now. We have a particular partner vendor we're working with that promises to deliver to us. I don't want to use too many keywords here. Information about the client's interest in reducing costs, and they implement AI, and I just don't see it. So I continue to do my manual outreach. And I was actually reading an article before we came here. So another, I would say probably a peer or competitor of yours offering AI outreach. And he was clear to say that the human component is absolutely necessary, because
yes.
we're all being bombarded by, every day I get these automated messages, whether I think there's AI behind it, but it's an automated message about selling me whatever kind of debt consolidation bullshit service or lead
Mhm.
generation service. Most of them are real. And I want to talk to a human in America
Yes, we're
or North
definitely
America.
going down a very strange road in the next 6 months to a year. I don't know how it's going to work. Larry, fantastic. If someone wants to find out more about yourself and your
Great.
franchise and what you do, where would they go?
You can go to LinkedIn, find me on LinkedIn. My name is Larry Levine. You could find me at the P3 Cost Analysts webpage, costanalysts.com. You could email me, LLEVINE at costanalysts.com.
So much. Thank you so much for chatting. That was fantastic.
Oh, that was fun. I appreciate it. We went much deeper than I thought we would, but it was mostly good stuff.